Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We are pleased to have you here for tonight's community information presentation about the 2021 bond proposal for Livonia Public Schools. I'd like to introduce my colleagues who are here with me this evening. We have President of our Board of Education, Mr. Mark Johnson, our Director of Operations, Mr. Phil Francis,
Hello.
our Director of Finance, Mrs. Allison Smith, and our Administrator of Communications, Mrs. Stacy Jenkins. And Mrs. Jenkins will be collecting any questions you may have at lpsbond@livoniapublicschools.org. Questions that are submitted throughout the presentation will be answered after the first portion of the formal presentation, which will take about 30 minutes. And then we'll be happy to answer questions that come in from the community during this meeting. So at this time, we are again pleased that you've joined us for our first of 3 virtual community forums. You may have had the opportunity to hear information about our bond issue during our many Board of Education meetings when this was discussed. But this evening, we will share with you a presentation that really covers a brief bit of background on the state's funding system for school districts. We'll talk a little bit about the current funding mechanisms that we have utilized to support our facilities as well as our students and schools. And then we'll talk specifically about the main tenets of the bond proposal and what we hope to do in order to reinvest in our schools and in our community. So I will invite Mrs. Smith to go ahead and get us started.
Thank you, Andrea. I will confirm everybody can see the slideshow.
That's correct.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. We thought it would be helpful before we get into the bond proposal itself to give a background on how schools are funded so that you can understand why we are bringing a proposal before our community this year. So the way that schools are funded goes back to 1994 in Proposal A. That established a per pupil foundation amount for each district. So we are paid that foundation allowance based on the number of students we had. At the time, the goal of Proposal A was to substantially reduce property taxes and also reduce the per pupil funding disparity that was taking place between districts. So those 2 goals were largely accomplished. Property taxes were lowered and the gap has shrunk. There is still a gap today, but it has gotten smaller. One moment while I advance the slide. It looks like there we go. This was just capturing what I was just stating. Proposal A was never calibrated to the actual cost of educating a child. I thought that would be important to point out. At the time, there was a designated pool of revenue that they knew would be brought in, and they also had the number of students across the state of Michigan. They did a pretty simple, math problem to determine how much that was per pupil, and that's how it was divvied out. And again, the consideration of upkeep of the facilities never came into play during that process. So how can schools raise funds for facilities? There's primarily 2 options. There's levying a sinking fund, and there's also proposing a bond. Sinking funds can be used for the continual upkeep of school buildings, facilities, and surroundings like parking lots and playgrounds. A sinking fund is used on a pay-as-you-go basis, and that means that all the money collected is utilized directly to benefit the district. There aren't any bonds sold, so there's no interest costs. We just use it as we collect it. In 2019, the LPS community approved a 1.6 mil sinking fund levy for a period of 10 years that generates approximately $7 million a year for the school district. And this goes to support our 10-year facility plan. We are currently using our sinking fund for 4 main areas: paving projects, boilers, and roofs. And with the passage of the 2019 sinking fund, school districts can now use sinking funds for instructional technology. So we just brought to our board this fall the first purchase of instructional technology. It was mobile devices for our kindergarten and first grade students that was partially funded out of the sinking fund. The other option for districts to raise funds for facilities is through a bond proposal. A school district may borrow money and issue bonds to defray the cost of purchasing, erecting, completing, remodeling, improving, furnishing, refurnishing, equipping school buildings, including athletic fields, playgrounds, and other facilities. And purchasing school buses. Um, like the sinking fund, bond proposals can only be used for these things. They can't be used for staff salaries or for purchasing textbooks. Unlike a sinking fund, we're able to borrow money up front, which allows us to tackle larger scale projects immediately while paying it back over time. The last bond proposal approved by our community was in 2013 for $195 million. And a bond also goes to support our long-term facility plan. The nice thing about bonds and sinking funds is that it allows our general fund revenue to stay more in the classroom instead of having to go towards these facility needs. We can use it for instructional purposes. So two large, a large benefit of both a bond and sinking fund. For some watching, you might feel like 2013 was just yesterday and didn't we just pass one? And we're really seeing a shift in the frequency of bond proposals. And it really makes sense when you think about the types of things that districts are purchasing with bonds. For instance, instructional technology was a huge piece of the 2013 bond. We spent nearly $30 million on instructional technology for the classroom, from projectors, the mobile devices, a variety of things. And those things don't last 20 years. Those things do need to be replaced, 5 years, maybe, 7 years on some things. And so it makes sense that the frequency in which bonds are proposed would be closer together. We've highlighted on this slide just a few districts neighboring us and some of the recent bond proposals that they've done. In Novi Community Schools, they went for a bond a year after us in 2014. And they've already gone for a bond. They went for one in 2019. In Plymouth Canton, they did a bond the same year as us in 2013, and they too went for another bond in 2019. And lastly, I'll point out South Line, who went for a bond in 2015 and then went for another in 2020. When we look at the election statistics across the state of Michigan, we see a very high passage rate for school bond proposals that don't include a millage increase. In the last few years, we've seen it at over a 90% passage rate, which goes to show that communities really are supporting their schools and these bond requests. With that, we do want to spend a minute going over with you and reviewing some of the things we were able to accomplish with the 2013 bond. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Francis, our Director of Operations.
Thank you very much. The 2013 bond, as Mrs. Smith has already mentioned, actually, when the board first started, a couple years even before that bond was on the ballot, started looking at the scope of the need in the district, they found it was a very large scope of work that was required with our facilities. So after quite a bit of work and paring things down, that was decided that the amount that the 2013 bond would be for $195 million. And that did take care of many items. And one of the biggest things and most noticeable items that was done were all of our classrooms, the interior of our buildings, our elementaries and middle schools and high schools and Western Wayne Skill Center, Jackson, etc. all had extensive renovations in the classrooms. And that would include items such as floors, ceilings, sound systems in the classrooms, classroom technology. We did HVAC systems, and there was much. The offices were done, carpeting in those offices, etc. So there is very extensive and very visual items that were done, along with items that were behind the walls, if you will, plumbing, toilet rooms, etc., electrical. So much was done, and everything that the board had designated was completed with that 2013 bond. And our learning spaces beyond just the classrooms, we also had other facility improvements, such as the entryways that we see at all of our buildings. The arch has become the branding of Livonia Public Schools, and all of our buildings have that entryway, along with a secure vestibule where the safety and security of those inside the building was put as a premium and as a top priority. Therefore, we have a system now that when visitors come to our buildings, they enter the vestibule and can only be allowed in. They can't just get in. They're only allowed in by the folks in the main office. We were able to purchase buses. We have 110 buses in our fleet, and nearly half of those were replaced throughout the 2013 bond. We were able also to purchase maintenance equipment like floor scrubbers, etc. And we had furniture in our school buildings and instructional equipment such as science equipment, band and musical instruments, and furniture. With regard to that item, there is extensive classroom furniture at all grade levels, as well as some what we call flexible furniture for more common spaces for student use. So many items throughout the 2013 bond. I don't want to forget our PACs. I think we're going to have some pictures here, Mrs. Smith, right? Let's roll through some of the pictures to show some before and afters. We have some school buildings here that have the fronts shown. We can see the beginning or the before and then the after with the entry archway and the new secure vestibules. We also did performing arts centers at all three high schools. Stevenson High School and Franklin High School had built from the ground up new performing arts centers. And you can see in the upper left, Stevenson's, and in the middle, we have a picture of Churchill's Performing Arts Center, which was actually a full gut of their former theater that they have inside the school building. Some examples of classrooms and main offices, and multiple examples of classroom furniture on this page. And then one of the items that I didn't mention previously, but we have a picture here of, is elementary playgrounds. We were able to replace playground equipment at all of our elementary schools, swings, large playscapes, single events. We did not, I should say, replace all of the playground equipment at all of our elementaries. We did it on a needed basis, and much was done, and we still have some more to go. And you can see the buses and examples of flexible furniture, as I mentioned earlier in this picture. And so what we want to show on this slide is that the items that the board designated to be completed with the 2013 bond funds was completely done. So the title of this slide is Promises Made, Promises Kept, and that is designating the fact that all of the items that the board laid out for the scope of the 2013 bond were completed. And we are very proud of that. So we do have items that weren't, and we mentioned this, not through any fault of anyone's, but literally because when you have as much need as we had back in 2013, we had to defer some of the scope to the future, and the future is now. We knew at that time that media centers, air conditioning, some computer lab spaces and science labs, the kitchens and serving lines, which in almost all of our buildings are completely original equipment, the doors and hardware across many toilet rooms, closets, etc., in our school buildings, and the high school field houses, which are nearly 20 years old now, and the high school competition gyms and locker rooms and pools and locker rooms were all deferred from that time period to future need. And it, like I mentioned a couple moments ago, the future is now. So you can really say that the planning for the 2021 bond began with the original planning of the 2013 bond. And I'll turn this slide back over to Mrs. Smith.
Thank you. As Mr. Francis shared, really the planning for it did start back in 2013, if you think about it, because back then, $275 million worth of needs for the facilities had been identified, and we requested from the community $195 million. And that was really, the 195 was determined between administration and through the Board of Education, looking at what we thought would be palatable to our community and be able to be supported by our community. And that's how we settled on the 195 million. and we decided that we would defer some of those projects for the future. We again had formal conversations about our need to address the facility plan in 2019 when we went for that sinking fund. And again, at that point, we knew or recognized that the sinking fund would bring in about $7 million a year for us, but that wasn't going to be able to get us, get the funds needed to do some of these major projects like air conditioning in each of our classrooms, like the media centers, like the kitchens and serving lines, that we would need another option for that. So we continue to have conversations internally in 2020. Towards the tail end of 2020, we started to formalize those conversations with the Board of Education and had meetings with them both at study sessions and committee meetings in November and December. And then it really came to a head in January 2021 when the board did vote in favor of putting a question out before the community of whether they would support a $186 million bond proposal for the district. So I will turn it back over to Mr. Francis. He's going to help us understand the 10-year facility plan that the district uses and how that's really helped us narrow in on why we're requesting $186 million.
Thank you. What we're showing here, and it's very difficult to see, we really just have a screenshot as an example, but I'm going to run through some background and history on our long-term facility plan. So the district before the 2013 bond, so nearly 10 years ago, put together a long-term facility plan and assessment of all sites in the district. And so by long-term, we mean 10 years. And just to keep it in the simplest form, every tab in this document is a different building. And under each tab, at each building, all aspects are noted. So whether it's a roof, a floor, an HVAC system, piping, etc., or whether it's on site, such as playground equipment, parking lots, etc., it is listed for the building. And if a need is has been determined within the next 10 years, it's marked down in one of three columns. We've broken the 10 years into three different columns: 0 to 3 years as we see the need being from 4 to 6 years out, and then finally the need being 7 to 10 years out. So as we go back and twice a year, we update this document. Obviously, if something has not yet been done and the time has been going on, we have to eventually move something from a column that, say, might be in the 0 to 3 range, and it finally may roll into the 4 to 6 year range. And when that happens, there is an escalation in projected cost, because as time moves on, the cost of doing work moves up with inflation. So when we take all of that together, and when we talk with the board about what the need in the district is, the facility need, we then take a look at what essentially would be the life of a bond, where how much work we would do, and that would be approximately 6 years. So we looked at the column of 0 to 3, as I mentioned, in totality, and recognized $102 million worth of need in the next 3 years. We then looked at the second column in totality and found that 4 to 6 years out, we have $108 million worth of need. Now, with technology, we have a separate plan, and it's also a 10-year needs assessment for technology. And we take a look at that over the next 6 years, and we recognize $29 million worth of need and worth of required work. So all of those total out to $239 million of identified needs over the next 6 years. However, Mrs. Smith had talked about earlier the sinking fund. We receive $7 million a year annually through the sinking fund. So to take that $7 million and calculate it out over 6 years, that becomes $42 million that we can back out of that $239 million need, because we know we'll be working through the sinking fund to replace roofs, boilers, parking lots, paving project, as well as any emergency items that may come up. That leaves us with $197 million of additional funding needed to be able to complete the required identified needs over the next 6 years. So when we talk with the board or our staff or the community about what our needs are, we're working from this document that's continually updated so that we know what the needs are and we don't have to go out and guess. So the work up front and then the continued updating helps the district always be on a solid footing with regard to what our needs are as we move along.
So we hope that gives you a general idea of, again, what the long-term facility plan does for us as we think about planning for this 2021 bond. So what were some of the current considerations for our district administration as we brought this recommendation forward to our board? And then what were the considerations that our board made as they made the final determination in January to put this proposal on the ballot? One important element for our community is that we truly have a window right now that only exists in May of 2021 to be able to request a bond issue that would have a zero tax rate increase for our community. That was an essential component and one that we felt was an opportunity that we did not want to see pass by. If we held off and waited to a later date, we would not be able to move forward, one, with this a bond issue of this amount and do that with a zero tax rate increase. So our tax rate would remain consistent at 4.1 mils levy as it is now if this bond issue is passed, but that would still allow us to have a significant reinvestment in our community. The second piece is that the district has worked extraordinarily hard for many years to demonstrate our strong fiscal stewardship. And so if you've followed the work of our Board of Education and the district over the past several years, you know that an essential element that has existed is steady and consistent growth of our district fund balance and increasing our financial stability. That has resulted in a higher rating on our bond rating, as well as the good work and good stewardship of our district funds have brought us the highest rating on our district audits. And it has also recently allowed us to refund bond debt from a prior bond, resulting in taxpayer savings of over $15 million. Finally, if anyone is interested, we do have quarterly dashboard reports that were shared publicly throughout the 2013 bond. As our board is aware, we shared with them as well, along with our owners rep Plantware and Cressa, this quarterly dashboard report. This was reported out 4 times a year, every year from 2013 until the completion of the bond in 2019. So we were able to identify for the community as well as our board the cash flow and the finances, a budget summary. We were able to share the bond phasing schedule, what would be coming next, what we were planning for, and always a reminder of the critical project issues that were in front of us at that point in time. This quarterly dashboard report was reported publicly again at our board meetings, and all of these were housed on our district website as well. In addition to that, and we'll hop back, thank you for going back to that last slide. In addition to that, we requested an outside bond audit each year of the bond, even though it is not required to be done each year. We had a second company, Yo and Yo, that completed our bond audit each and every year. And again, on those, our district received the highest rating. So this is an essential component because we would not come out to our community and our board would certainly not move forward with this on the ballot if we did not believe that this was, one, a very necessary project for our school district, and had we not demonstrated consistent fiscal stewardship. The last piece Mrs. Smith shared with us earlier in the presentation was really that review of this process of bond issues in neighboring communities. Livonia continues to be a leader. We continue to be a leader in a destination district for families, for staff, and for our community. We know in order to maintain that and to keep that, we need to continue to reinvest in the growth and innovation and programming for our students, and really focus on not only the recruitment of new families to our district, but the retention of the students we have within Livonia Public Schools. So our current needs assessment, again, that flowed through that long-term facility plan, really identified three main areas for the bond: completing previously identified projects. And when we say previously identified projects, again, that comes from one, the long-term facility plan that was initially created in preparation for the 2013 bond, as well as the upkeep of that that's done twice a year. So we understand the needs of literally every nook and cranny of each one of our schools and facilities across the district. We understand the conditions of our facilities: restrooms, doors, ceilings, roofs, paving, etc. And so we've identified those areas and where we need to complete either previously identified projects or focus on maintaining and enhancing the investment that we've already made. So the first section really has some exciting elements in that we are looking to redesign and reimagine our library media centers. Those library media centers were not touched at all in our 2013 bond, and we are excited about the possibilities of collaborative learning environments for our students and also instructional spaces for our staff and our media specialists. When we think about our kitchens and our serving lines, it's not an area we, that often the public has the opportunity to see, but those are original to our schools. So in most cases, those are 50 to 60 years old. Again, this is an area that was quickly identified as a need that exists, and a need to update within all of our facilities. An element that may not be familiar to our community, but certainly is to our students, our families, and our staff, is that we do not have air conditioning throughout all of our classrooms and learning environments. So we are looking to both enhance our HVAC air quality, and also add air conditioning to each of our classrooms, labs, and offices where it does not currently exist. We'll move on to the next section. And Mr. Francis, if you want to highlight some elements with regard to technology and athletics, we're going to stay back on that slide, and then I'll hop back in for the future forward projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So from a technological standpoint, once we have our cycles of purchases, that we must continue those on, because unfortunately technology doesn't last like a roof lasts, or like a boiler lasts. The really, and Mrs. Smith said this earlier, you see a 5 to 7 year range in most items. So we have mobile devices for students, we have teacher workstations, and when I say teacher workstation, that includes principals and counselors and all of those educational staff, really, secretaries, etc. We have servers, we have fiber networks and cables, we have Wi-Fi, we have so many hardware items throughout the district that need continual refresh periods. So it's important that when we have our safety and security directly tied to technology, meaning items such as the card access readers for entry by employees into buildings, when we have the system for the secure vestibule that our office staff are able to monitor and then allow access to visitors, security cameras on buses, security cameras in buildings, both interior, exterior, all of these pieces with regard to information technology, it kind of can fall under that umbrella. And those are items that need to be continually updated, upgraded, and replaced. The athletic areas that we've done quite a bit of wonderful work actually through the sinking fund at our high schools, but there are still several spaces that have not been touched. We have I mentioned earlier at the high schools, the field houses that are about 20 years old, and while they're in good condition, there needs to be updates to them. As an example, the annex building by the fields, the football/soccer fields at the 3 high schools. That roof in the next few years is slated for replacement. And there's also fascia boards on there that need repair and replacement, really replacement, because they're starting to crack and break. And just items like that, like many of us recognize with our own homes, knowing that asphalt shingles and different pieces like that need to be replaced. We have the playgrounds that are elementaries that I mentioned. We were able to do those in part, but not in totality. We currently have playground equipment that when we try to find replacement parts for them, we've tried a couple times in the past year, and it turns out they're just not making them anymore. They're so old that there aren't even parts to be able to replace or repair certain pieces. With regard to the furniture, our staff during the 2013 bond who worked on the furniture committee, that was something that they put all their efforts and budget into student furniture. So we were able to replace those desks and chairs, etc. But we did not replace in that last cycle of the bond teacher furniture. So we have these updated classrooms with very, very old teacher desks and chairs. So we're looking to replace items like that and other instructional equipment. So we have much still to do that we've been planning on doing from our 10-year facility plan, including buses still, keeping that cycle, etc. There's some, I don't want to drone on because I feel like I'll get the big hook after a little while, but there is much to do from that 10-year facility plan.
All righty, and so let's move on to that third section as we bring the presentation to a close. If we could just hop back to that prior slide. And I'll talk a little bit about our future forward projects. And we are very excited about some of the elements of this section. As we think about expanding our opportunities for our STEM education, we utilize Project Lead the Way, which is really the gold standard in the curriculum for STEM education. We currently have those opportunities for our students at middle school and high school. We look to continue to expand those options for our students and provide the necessary resources and materials. We're also excited about the opportunity to have a permanent home for our very successful and award-winning robotics program. We have multiple teams at both the middle school and the high school level, and we are looking again to house them in a permanent location for both their preparation and practice field, and that will be a strong addition to a high quality program that exists in our district for students across all of our middle school and high schools. The second key element is adding an early childhood center. We are thrilled about the opportunity to grow on what is already a strong foundation of early childhood education in Livonia Public Schools and be able to do so in a state-of-the-art, joyful and welcoming early childhood center. We're so proud of the programs that currently exist. Many of them have wait lists, and the opportunity to expand our facilities and be able to bring more students into that program is something that we have heard repeatedly throughout the community as a need. Finally, the workforce development aspect, or really as we often hear referred to as college and career readiness. We are so proud of our Livonia Career Technical Center and the CTE programs we currently offer. We have 8 different career pathways and multiple classes within those pathways. We also know that, unfortunately, there are times when we have to turn away our students in entering that program because we've reached capacity. So as those areas and needs continue to grow, as well as different career paths that we'd like to explore, we are looking to enhance those opportunities and the Livonia Career Technical Center itself in order to be able to grow that programming. So we want to take a moment and share the ballot proposal itself. There are 3 sections on the ballot proposal, and oftentimes when you receive the ballot, whether you're an absentee voter and you're receiving it in the mail, or you arrive at your polling site and you take a look at the wording, it often sounds rather dry and perfunctory, And so we just wanted to take a moment and really indicate that there are three main sections of the ballot that you will see. The first section really talks about the fact that this proposal is asking for the district to have the ability to sell bonds to raise $186 million for the projects that have been identified in this bond proposal. The second section really describes the allowable uses. It focuses on upgrading safety and technology, improving and expanding our facilities and our program spaces for academic success, and also upgrading our playground and athletic facilities. So those are really the key components, in addition to the school buses and furniture elements that Mr. Francis talked about earlier. Finally, an essential element of the bond is the fact that this is a zero tax rate increase. Our community's residents' tax rate would not change if the bond passes. This also indicates that bond funds can only be used for the physical improvements that we've identified and cannot be used for salaries or the maintenance or repair of our facilities. Essentially, our voters will be asked to vote yes or no on this bond proposal. And so a few reminders and a few key dates. The election is on May 4th. Currently, our city clerk has sent out the ballot applications to households. So many of our households have received the ballot application if you have indicated that you would like to vote absentee. You have that ability to both vote absentee prior to or the day of the election, as well as vote at our normal polling places throughout the district on May 4th. Mrs. Jenkins, I'll turn it over to you if we've received any questions from the community during this presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent Oquist. At this time, we do not have any questions that have come in through our LPS bond at livoniapublicschools.org. If we do have viewers out there who are still wishing to submit a question, now's your time. In the meantime, I came a little bit prepared with a few questions that we have received about the bond over the past several weeks. So I will go ahead and start with if the district is receiving stimulus money from the government for COVID relief, can that be used for these improvements?
I'd be happy to take that one. Yes, we have received money through both, primarily through the CARES Act. We received some funding in July and August, and we're anticipating some additional funding coming through any day. And they have identified that you can use it for facility improvements, but really the main intent of the CARES money was to help districts get to the learning gaps that have potentially occurred due to the pandemic. So it's really intended for instructional purposes. And so that is our intention, is to work with our board. In fact, this month we'll be bringing a budget update, not only for the 2021 school year, we'll also be looking ahead to the 21-22 school year and how we can utilize those stimulus monies to impact our kids' education. So at this point, we were not planning to utilize any of those federal dollars to address the facility needs. I will mention, again, as we've gone through what the facility needs are, even if we did decide that, yes, we're going to put that towards a facility, it definitely would not cover all of the facility needs that we've identified.
Thank you. And another question is, if this is a zero tax rate increase, where will the money come from?
I'd be happy to take that one as well. So the way that it's possible is because some of our existing debt is either falling off or the payment for it is decreasing. And so we can utilize that drop in those payments for the existing debt and leverage it, again, going at this time to maintain our current tax rate and use the funds that we'll be collecting to go towards these new bonds. And so again, this would be not a tax rate increase. It would be maintaining our current tax rate. And because we have some existing debt that's either falling off or the payments for them are dropping in these next tax years, we can go for this bond proposal. Again, looking at a 20-year term that'll generate $186 million for the district.
Mrs. Jenkins, one of the questions that has come up recently is how many years would it take to complete the bond projects that we've identified? And so I thought perhaps Mr. Francis and I could spend a few minutes talking about that aspect. Generally, when we take a look at the bond work that we've identified, and it's significant, we've talked about that we have 23 schools and 28 facilities total with almost 3 million square feet. So certainly it's a multi-year project. At this point, we anticipate about a 6-year plan. The majority of the work that we do at our schools will be done during the summer months. And of course, that's the time in which we generally do not have students and staff present in our schools, and we're able to do that work without disruption. There are some projects that can be done throughout the year, especially if they're on our grounds or on the sites of the schools. But we generally anticipate that the bonds will be issued in 2 series, and that will also allow us to take care of this work over, again, approximately a 6-year period of time. Mr. Francis?
Yeah, I'd like to add in that the election is May 4th. And if the community does pass this bond on May 4th, we would like to be able to implement some of the items we have planned right away. An example of that might be technology. We can turn those purchases around, I say relatively quickly. 8 weeks to 10 weeks is much quicker than construction. Maybe even, if it's possible, some playground equipment. However, I want the community to understand that we would not be able to do construction projects in the summer of 21, because if this passes in May, the district would then proceed with vetting and hiring architects, construction managers, etc. And it would take the year to do the planning that's appropriate for such large construction items, such as remodeling a media center, et cetera, et cetera. So just to prepare on that same idea of the length of, I guess the flip of that is how quickly would things begin? And we would hope to have some things happen quite quickly, but large scale projects will certainly not begin until the summer of 22 and beyond.
Okay, thank you. If the bond were not to appear on the ballot in May, would my taxes decrease?
I'd be happy to address that one. You'll find on the ballot proposal, which we do have as part of our FAQ document, and it was one of the slides on tonight's presentation. Under that informational section, it mentions that the levy for this bond for this current tax year would be 1.37 mils. So if the bond were not to be successful in May, the millage rate would go down 1.37 mils. But what I would like to point out is the facility need will not go away. So this wouldn't be something that we in essence would have to bring this back to the public, and probably would look to bring another request before the community in November. And at that time, we might not be able to garner the same dollar amount. And at that point, it would be considered a tax rate increase. So this really is the optimal window to go for this bond proposal, which is why we're bringing it on the May 4th election date.
Mhm. And actually, a follow-up question would be why the May election date and not a general election date?
Yep. And that is really to take advantage of this window of opportunity so that we can go, it would be a no tax rate increase. So what we were requesting of the community for the 2020 tax year would be the same rate that we're asking for the 2021 tax year. And so that's why we are going in May. Also, this is obviously a bond proposal, something that the district and the board take very seriously and put a lot of time into it. And obviously the focus has been on the pandemic and getting our students back. We're so proud to have our students back in person that chose that option starting back in October 5th. So a lot of work went into that. But again, we didn't want to lose the opportunity for this window to go for a no tax rate increase. So that's why it was important for us to bring it to our community this May.
Okay, thank you.
President Johnson, a question that we get periodically is with regard to the 2013 bond, and that we had identified some needs back then that were not ultimately included in the bond issue in 2013. You were on the board at that period of time and had to make some tough decisions. Could you just share a little bit about that, just as a reminder for the community of where we were at that point in time?
Sure. Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. You're right. I was one of only two of our present board members who were on the school board at that time. And as I think Mrs. Smith said, our wish list at that time, after significant research and evaluation, was pushing 300 million. But we didn't believe at that time that it would be prudent or fiscally responsible to ask the community for that amount of money. And I can't tell you how appreciative we are to the community to have passed that bond to allow us to do the things that we have done. And you're right, it was somewhat painful because you're trying to determine on a priority basis what are the most important needs or necessary needs at that particular point in time, and what could we delay into the future into perhaps a future bond. So it was very difficult. And one of the things I'll say is one of the most important things to us, I think, was the technology part of it, because if we look back in hindsight, particularly over this last year with the pandemic, if we had not gone with the technology and the infrastructure that we chose to integrate at that time, it would have been much more difficult for us to provide the community, the students, with the initial online learning and then the Livonia virtual. So that to me is one of the most important things that we had. And unfortunately, the needs of our facilities, with being 50, 60 years old, those never stop. Those are things that will be going on into the future. And although the sinking fund takes care of some of the maintenance items, we need to do upgrades. And it was very difficult for the board at that time to determine what we could cut and delay into the future. And I think it's important for the community to understand that these are things that we needed to do back then. It was a priority for us to get certain other items done. These things never went away, and now we have an opportunity to perhaps complete what we had started.
That concludes the questions that I had prepared.
All right, so I'd like to just remind anyone watching a few places where they can gather or get information about the bond. And so if you go on to our district website, www.livoniapublicschools.org, there is right on the front page of the website, there's a section dedicated to information about the bond proposal. And so if you click on that, you will find a frequently asked questions document. You will find a informational brochure. It's a 4-page informational brochure. And you will also find what we're referring to as specific or topical flyers. And so there's flyers that detail more information about things like STEM education or the robotics program, workforce development, or the infrastructure improvements that we've talked about this evening. So those topical flyers, the brochures, and the general information included in that section of the website will hopefully provide our community with much of the information that they need. The community should have also received our regular district newsletter that we send out multiple times a year, entitled The Dialogue, that hit mailboxes this past week. And I believe there's also information included in the Livonia Today magazine. So hopefully our community has the opportunity to gather that information. And if there are any questions, we do have a dedicated web address, email address, lpsbond@livoniapublicschools.org. We invite you to reach out with any questions, ideas, questions, feedback, input that you have. Please go ahead and send that along to us, and we'll be happy to get back with you. And one last reminder that we have 2 additional community information nights on March 16th and April 14th. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Have a good night.